you wrote a piece not too long ago called "The University of Nowhere," and you began, well, in the middle of it, you introduced the extraordinary, I can't remember if Sebastian, German last name.
I can't remember his last name either now.
What?
No,
it's a different Sebastian.
No,
but in any case, he's the
it's
Stanford guy
he's the Stanford
who's
Google
decided
guy.
to go somewhat outside of Stanford to do some teaching to lots and lots of people. Amy Gutman knows. Yes, Thurn,
Yeah,
Thurn.
that's it.
We have the president of the university here who is to be counted on to know information that you and I should know, and that you wrote about yourself.
Either that or just Googled it.
No, I don't think, she does not have a smartphone in her hands. Amy Gutman, Bill Keller.
Nice to meet you.
So you wrote about this guy, and along the way you made a really interesting observation. You said you have some doubts about whether this is such a good idea, but the point you made also is it's possible that if this sort of thing happens, that colleges and universities that depend on tuition, that is unlike a place like Penn, which also depends on its endowment and would survive these big changes, or presumably would. You said, it might be that some of these colleges and universities go the way of the small local newspaper. And so you created in that piece, you weren't really writing about this, but this is what struck me. You created in that piece an analogy, maybe a warning, that what you guys have been experiencing in journalism and newspapers might happen to the universities. It's an interesting analogy to me. Do you want to pursue that at all?
A little. I mean, I think it is happening. I think all or most major institutions, and particularly institutions that are hives of information, that deal in information in some way or another, have already had their business model upended by the internet. I thought, what really drew me to the Stanford story was, here you have, on the one hand, the president of the university, committed to, they didn't get it, but trying to build this new campus in New York City.
Right, in New York.
In a traditional format, and arguing the case for, a campus as a place where people gather together in person, study together, and that was really sort of an irreplaceable ideal. And then you had, this genius of the internet world saying, you know what, we can do this we can sell this for a tiny fraction of what we're selling it for. A lot of what goes into the cost of a college education is just prestige and status and credentialing. But for people who can't afford that, but still want this, we can give them the same. I can give them the same education online. I'm not sure if that's entirely true. I mean, there's a lot of missing data about how good and how lasting something you learn online is compared to what you learn in person. But
what about
but it's already beginning to happen. Both for better and for worse. I mean, the news business has been improved by the internet, and also been drastically upset. And I think the same thing is happening with universities. They're improved. I mean, you have access to any library in the world online. You have access to lectures from people who can only be in one place, and they may happen to be at MIT or someplace in Europe or China. But on the other hand, it is going to nibble away at the business model.
So if I make a case for the value of the radically democratic move that this potentially constitutes, reaching out to hundreds of thousands of people to deliver Stanford quality instruction to lots and lots of people who otherwise couldn't afford it, let's just stipulate that that's not a bad argument and go back to newspapers. So you managed somehow, miraculously, to be the executive editor of the New York Times. Everybody was looking at this, to do the paywall and to pull it off. This is somewhat analogous to what we're talking about at the universities, because basically we're taking down the paywall. So I guess this is a slant way of asking you about the paywall, because the arguments, some of the arguments are, gee, it would be great if Times content could just get out there freely. And that's obviously a threat economically.
Alan Rusbridger, who's the editor of The Guardian in London, is a good friend of mine, and he and I have a running argument. He is almost religious on the notion that journalism should be free of charge and open. Although they sell their app now, so he's moved a little in my direction. What the Times did was actually, and we're in an experimental phase. Everybody's trying to figure out what works for them, and what works for the New York Times is not necessarily going to work for a local newspaper. Is not necessarily going to work for even the Washington Post. But what seems to be working for us, it's a year or so in, is a model that's only. I don't think of it as a paywall. It's a subscription, but it's open. You can get most of what's on the Times for free. In the normal course of events, you get a lot of it for free. If you get there from a link, if you get there because somebody's emailed you.
An aggregator might have done. That's another. We will talk about the aggregators.
That's the follow-up question. But you get there through search. You get 20 articles a month free anyway.
Right.
And in fact, Napster has been shut down, but if you want to, you can get all your music free online if you're willing to be dishonest about it. I mean, there's nothing you cannot get, or movies. You can get first-run movies online for free if you're willing to steal them. But people go to iTunes and other pay places because it's convenient, and they kind of like to know that they're not breaking the law or impoverishing musicians. And something of the same psychology works at the Times.